I would love to welcome Dr. Nancy Gell as our first presenter. Dr. Gell is from the University of Vermont. She's an associate professor in the Department of Rehab and Movement Science. And she has a couple different areas of research that she is interested in: exercise and physical activity adherence, and using technology to monitor behavior, also strategies for healthy aging. So I'm going to let her talk a little bit more about her background and let you know what else she does for research and for teaching. And she's going to share a little bit with us today about physical activity during COVID-19. So welcome, Dr. Gell.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I assume I'm not muted. I usually mute myself. So thank you very much. I keep looking up there to see you, but I'm going to try to look at the camera. Thank you very much for having me here and the opportunity to meet and speak with all of you. I am familiar with how an online meeting can be different from an in-person meeting, but I'm hoping we can still make the most of our time together. I learned a tip from a longtime student educator on getting more from an online class or an online meeting. I tried it myself and I found it very helpful. Would you be interested in hearing this tip? And you can use the chat, by the way, if you want to answer. You can nod your heads if you want to hear the tip. Otherwise, I'll just move on. Getting a yes. So the old-fashioned pen and paper, having a piece of paper while you're at the computer, doodling, writing, taking notes, is a way to help kind of stay engaged. And it's easy to get distracted with phones and keyboards and screens and other things. And just having a piece of paper to kind of help keeps you in the meeting. So that's my tip that's worked for me. I hope it can work for you. So I'm interested in helping people discover the wonderful world of movement and activity. And I've noticed some really interesting parallels with COVID and how we do messaging around COVID and our behaviors around COVID. So I thought I'd bring that into our discussion, that it'll help to illustrate some key concepts. I have a number of questions throughout the presentation for you, and we certainly have time at the end. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I reserve the right to call on people randomly, so pay attention. All right, a quick overview on what we're doing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got here, how I ended up where I am today. What's the big deal with exercise? We're going to do a little bit about terminology. I have this framework we're going to talk about to put it all in context and how exercise relates to COVID, what they have to do with each other and what I'm talking about. And then I'll put that in the context of some of my research. So how did I get here? I have a long winding path. My joke is that I was on the 10-year education plan where I went back to school every 10 years. So my first degree was in physical therapy. I worked as a clinician, a physical therapist for over 20 years. And I had a great time. I loved it. It's a great career. And I loved having the base knowledge of a clinician. But it also led me to a lot of questions. And I was working with people who had chronic conditions later in life, some in midlife, some in early life. And I said, why do I keep seeing the same problem? Can't we do something about this earlier? Aren't there other answers rather than us treating people one by one by one by one? And so that led me to pursue the Master's in Public Health with a focus on health behavior and health education. And that was, that was a whole new world for me. I learned a lot from that. I took a position as a research project manager, and that just happened, but I learned a lot and it led me more down the path of research. I was a clinician during that time. I never stopped working with patients. And eventually that led me to want to get a degree, my doctoral degree in exercise science. And that kind of brought together public health and my perception of the world as a physical therapist and the benefits of exercise. So, and then after that, I did a postdoctoral fellowship with more of a focus on aging. So that's the paper version. I have too many letters after my name. That was never my intention or my ultimate goal, but one thing led to another, and one question led to another degree. So that's how I ended up there. But it, you know, I was thinking about it, and it's not so much about the degrees, and it's the people along my career path who gave me opportunities that I didn't even recognize at the time. So one person said, hey, would you be a guest lecturer for a class for me? And I got exposure to teaching. And then someone else said, hey, we're doing a research project. Would you help us collect data? And then someone said, oh, you have some data experience. Would you like to be a project manager? Oh, you've been a project manager. Would you like to help us put this research project together? We're creating a program to promote physical activity in older adults. We'd like you to be a part of it. So I had opportunities that people gave me along the way that I point out because it's really sometimes about things you don't even realize are coming along. It's not always just the degrees. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope it does. So my first question, where I need you guys to respond. What is so great about exercise? Why do we have a whole field, a whole area of expertise about physical activity and exercise? So throw it up in the chat. What are the benefits of exercise? And I'm looking up to the chat. So we have healthier lifestyle, released endorphins, release stress, good for your heart, healthier, happy, cardiac health. Yep. You can eat more food. Yeah, that's a good one, right? And fitness. So we got some great answers there. And these go along with a lot of the things that you have. You guys really focus, you have the mind aspect. We've done more research in the area of physical health benefits. There are certainly mental health benefits, as I have on here, but it reduces risk for heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, diabetes, protects against functional decline, cognition changes, hip fractures, depression. There's evidence for helping with anxiety, also with weight maintenance, bone density, fall risk. The list goes on, and the way that I like to, this is a wonderful article that I think summarizes it well. I'm gonna just focus on this for a minute here. Regular physical activity, I want you to think about what I'm saying. Regular physical activity is an effective preventive strategy for at least 25 medical conditions. And it can reduce risk typically in the 20 to 30% range. So we can reduce the risk of 25 chronic medical conditions up to 30%. We could just ballpark and call it 25. I call it the 25 for 25. I don't know many other things where you get that much benefit from one thing. So think about that. There's a lot of benefit to exercise. I work in promoting exercise in cancer survivors. So I had put this slide together where exercise has actually been shown to reduce the risk of cancer, certain types of cancer, and it can also help prevent cancer progression for certain kinds of cancer, and it can help with overall survival and remission. So lots of evidence accumulating around just one type of disease with cancer and exercise. So is anyone convinced, not convinced yet, that there might be it might be worthwhile to engage in exercise or physical activity? Raise your hand. Just let me know if you're not convinced. I'll pull out some more evidence for you. Okay, I've already talked about a term. Are those 25 chronic conditions the same across the globe or specific to the US? Globally. So it's going to help people. I mean, exercise, I'm not saying the studies have been done globally, but meeting a certain amount of physical activity, doing it on a regular basis, will reduce the risk in human beings. So it's not just, most of the stuff, like I said, most of the studies are in the US, not all of them. A lot of this research is done in Australia, UK, Japan, New Zealand. So I wouldn't limit that just to the US. Any other questions? Okay. I throw around a term, health behavior. I did that as part of my master's degree. So I just want to make sure, because sometimes I use the term a lot and then I realize people don't know what I'm talking about. So what is health behavior? It's defined as the activity undertaken by people for the purpose of maintaining or enhancing their health, preventing health problems, or achieving a positive body image. So I want to know if you have questions. Is that person, get to that, about what health behavior is, and then I want you to throw up in the chat examples. What is an example of a health behavior? Exercise or physical activity is one health behavior. What might be another? So smoking or not smoking, how we eat. Yep. What else is a health behavior? So something that will maintain or enhance your health, prevent health problems, what you drink, how you sleep, exposure to nature, socialization. That's a great one. You know, we often, that's kind of been ignored, but social interaction is actually an important health behavior. Limiting sugar, keeping medication, actually medication can be a health behavior. That's correct. So taking it. Getting education, we know that education is associated with better health. You guys are doing fantastic. Other ones are seatbelt use. That's a health behavior. Not texting and driving. That's a health behavior. I think you hit on a lot of them. So great job on that. So are we clear? We're pretty good on, when I say health behavior, it's anything that's going to affect your health. Okay, this is the terminology section, just making sure we're all on the same page. We're going to bear with it. It's only a few slides. I have already been egregious in using the terms physical activity and exercise, but sorry, I just got distracted for a second. But physical activity is an umbrella term, and then there's many things that fall under it. So exercise is one part of physical activity. Physical activity refers to any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that results in energy expenditure. It's any movement. So it's when you're not sitting, lying down, or standing still, once you start moving, that's physical activity. Then there's different intensity levels. So doing household chores, gardening, yard work, walking across campus, riding your bike to school, going to the gym, that's exercise, also physical activity. The movement you do at work, all of that counts under physical activity. Exercise is gambling. What do I mean by umbrella term? Physical activity encompasses all of these. So you can see my terminology slide, right? Okay, so physical activity is the umbrella term. Household chores are physical activity. Gardening and yard work, you're moving, that's physical activity. Active transport, that's physical activity. These are all subcategories. So exercise is a subcategory of physical activity, and it is, the definition is planned, structured, and repetitive movements which result in the improvement or maintenance of physical fitness, including cardiovascular fitness, muscular strength, endurance, body composition, or flexibility. So physical activity is any movement, and exercise is the subcategory of movement that is planned, structured, repetitive, and for the purpose of improvement or maintenance of physical fitness. Questions about that? I'm going to answer those questions because they're going to come up. So Alexis and Hansberger, let me know if I don't get to your questions because we're going to cover these. So physical activity can be at different intensities, right? That's the kicker. And we have minimum recommend. So I told you about all those wonderful benefits, right? There's all these benefits to physical activity or exercise, but in order to get those benefits, we have a minimum level of recommendations. So what are those recommendations? I bet somebody here has heard them. So let me know what you think are the minimum, what are the physical activity guidelines? What should we be aiming for? Is anybody familiar with how much should we do? We have national guidelines. All the experts got together, they looked through all the evidence and they said, this is really how much you should aim for. And there we go. So we've got a little bit, we're getting there. You guys are pretty close. For adults, now children are different. If you want to know what children are, I can tell you, but this is for adults. Moderate intensity physical activity for 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Another way to say it is 150 minutes a week, right? 30 minutes times 5. If we want to simplify it, we're always trying to simplify the message, right? 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity most days of the week. I don't have 30 minutes. How can I do 30 minutes? Who's got 30 minutes? Okay, you could go at a higher intensity and only do 20 minutes. Vigorous activity for 20 minutes, 3 days a week. 60 minutes, going for a jog, hard out, 20 minutes, that's all you have to do 3 days a week, and you met those minimum recommendations. Is more better? In many circumstances, yes. This is the minimum to get those wonderful health benefits I talked about, like reducing risk for diseases. Within our guidelines, there's recommendations for doing strengthening exercise, balance exercise, especially as we age, and stretching as we age. So strengthening exercise, I don't pay enough attention to when I talk because I focus on the physical activity part of it, the cardiovascular part of it, but strength at least twice a week of the major muscle groups is also recommended. Here is a slide that I've just thrown these terms about light, moderate, vigorous. I like this slide, I like this graphic because I think it simply conveys the difference between light, moderate, vigorous, and sedentary. So metabolic equivalence is the scale, which is a measure of energy expenditure, and I won't go too much beyond that. So let's see if there's questions, and I'm going to put it back to you. I'm going to go to the question. There are guidelines. It's interesting because the exercise guidelines for cancer survivors just came out. It was released like 5 minutes ago. And so there are specific recommendations in there for cancer survivors, but essentially it's also the same recommendations. They're still, the recommendation still falls back to 30 minutes most days of the week of moderate intensity exercise. Oh, the bout question. Great question, Jenna. So let's go back to that. This is fascinating because, and it's a really great question. We used to have guidelines that said you had to do it in a bout of at least 10 minutes. So if you went all out sprinting for 5 minutes and then stopped, the old guideline said that doesn't count. You have to do at least 10 minutes in a row. But luckily, and that was so confusing, right? So we got rid of that one, not because it was confusing, but because the evidence has built up over the past decade to say 30 minutes in any duration. Now the goal is really getting that heart rate elevated, right? You need to be breathing a little heavier, you need your heart rate elevated, but it's not, you could do that 30 minutes could be 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 5 minutes, or it could be 10 minutes, or it could be 30 minutes all at once. Let me know if that doesn't answer. Let's see. Do these guidelines apply to anybody from the age of 18 all the way up? We do not have separate guidelines for older adults other than to stress balance. and that if you can't meet these guidelines, that you should do what you can. The guidelines don't change a lot. I gotta move my arrow here. Is this distracting if I read the questions? You can, okay. I have too many screens. Okay, so I gotta move this chat a little here. I said children, how to guidelines with various health problems. Most of the time, these guidelines apply. Nobody gets less than this. Nobody gets a lower recommendation, except if they can't achieve these recommendations, then we say do what you can. Talking about healthy mixture. That's a very complicated question, Elizabeth, and we may have, let's come back to that at the end. Type of cancer does not affect the intensity of the exercise unless, of course, somebody is, for example, if they are so deconditioned, they have metastatic cancer that they can't achieve this yet, and so we would start lower and work up to this. Okay, let's see. Now I get this to work. Let's see. Okay, so that's the graphic I like, and then I had a question for you because I want to make sure I just gave you these terms: light, moderate, vigorous. Could you explain the difference? Do you understand the difference between moderate and vigorous? And do you think, and I guess I'm wondering if you understand why it's important to explain the difference between, say, light activity or moderate activity. So we have what's walking, jogging, running. Examples, walking can be light, walking can be moderate. So it depends on the pace you walk at. If you're just kind of strolling, that could be light. As you get your heart rate, you're going to get to that moderate intensity. So that's why I like this graphic. It's kind of a stroll, faster walk to somebody running. We tell people at a moderate pace, your heart rate is elevated, you're starting to breathe a little heavier, but you can still talk. You can still have a conversation with someone. With vigorous, you're getting to the point where your heart rate is elevated, you're breathing faster, but it's harder to hold a conversation. That's kind of a simple way of doing terms. Light, able to hold a conversation, vigorous, there we go. Maria is on the game. It's good to know the difference so you don't do too much or too little, right? So I'm in this weird world where I'm just like desperate to get people to move any amount, right? I'll take anything. If you get up and walk across the room, I'm like, yay, you moved, you're not sitting. But the truth is, to really get those benefits, we want people up in that moderate intensity activity. So can you see my dilemma there where I get excited about any movement, but I really, we're still trying to push people towards that moderate intensity. Yes, it does depend on your level of fitness, but that doesn't mean that each person, or if you're more fit than I am, we should still be doing moderate at our own level of fitness. So page one, okay. We're going to do this is the last thing on terminology because it relates to what I'm going to be talking about. So we have exercise we've talked about, planned, structured, related to some component of fitness. Then we have lifestyle physical activity. Lifestyle physical activity can be at a light intensity or it can be at a moderate intensity. So when you're running from one class to the other, we don't really count that exercise. The goal of that walk was to get from one building to the other. We don't really classify it as planned, structured, but that doesn't mean you didn't get up to a vigorous intensity while you ran across campus to get to the other. So lifestyle physical activity is, exercise is one way to meet the recommended level of physical activity for those wonderful health benefits. Lifestyle physical activity is another way to do it. It's like we talked about, you can have bouts throughout the day. You can have oh, you're gonna have to tell me if sorry, I just realized anyway, it tells me my internet connection's unstable. So let me see if you have a question about that, because lifestyle physical activity, you can earn those moderate vigorous minutes by parking further away from your destination or taking the stairs instead of the elevator, as long as you're accumulating those minutes. Okay. This is for me to have a drink of water. Quick recap, just of what have we talked about. A winding path is interesting and often influenced by forces we may not perceive. That's the story of my life. There's benefits to being physically active. I hope I've made that point and you all have seen that, and that we have terminology so that we have a universal language, but hopefully you're also seeing how complex the simple term of exercise really is. Lifestyle activity, does it include different jobs like desk job? So it's not usually what it's kind of conflating things. So if you're sitting at a desk job, we call that a sedentary job. Lifestyle activity is more about accumulating movement through your lifestyle. When we look at job physical activity, we often call that occupational physical activity. Again, terminology complexity. Yes, there is a level where exercise becomes detrimental, and it's way out there. Like we're talking, if I go back to this one, you take that vigorous and you just throw the football all the way down to the other end of the field. Like there is a level. And I am not talking about that today. And the reason is it doesn't affect a whole lot of people. So I'm interested in how we can get the most benefit for the people, but I will answer your question so that if you want to investigate that further. What fraction of physical activity should be exercise? I'm going to let you think about that. I'm going to let you guys answer that. See if you can answer that based on the information I've given you. Okay, how are we doing in the US for physical activity? And we can come back and check your answer with me at the end. How are we doing in the US for physical activity? I am going to admit my data is a little bit old, but it hasn't really changed. All right, so these 10 people represent the US population. The CDC asks people every year, you know, what do you do for physical activity? We ask people to self-report how much physical activity they do. And we have 20% of people don't participate, these are in adults, don't participate in any physical activity. 20%, none. We have an additional 30 plus percent who do some physical activity, but not enough to meet those minimum guidelines. Then we have just under 50% of the US adult population that self-report doing an activity to meet the guidelines. Then a number of years ago, before Fitbits even existed, we had, I should have one. Oh, here we go. We have where am I? This is an actigraph accelerometer that we still use for research. It's pre-Fitbit. It collects the same kind of data as a Fitbit, but you can't, the person who wears it can't see what they're getting. Anyway, so they put that on a national sample of people. How did we do compared to how people self-report? 5% of the US adult population meets physical activity guidelines when we actually go and assess it objectively. Little difference between what we ask people and when we measure. Does that mean people are liars? Absolutely not. That's a whole nother talk. Both of these studies have limitations. They're not perfect. They give us a snapshot. For me, the takeaway is we aren't doing enough. We need efforts in order to help people be more physically active, in order to help people experience those health benefits and live healthy lives. Tarquin, I wish I knew how to say your name. I would consider occupational activity. There's been discussions. Do you count occupational activity as physical activity for the guidelines? There's various viewpoints on that. And many of the questionnaires ask about physical activity during leisure time. They don't include occupational time. Other studies, other people, other experts say, you know, any is good and we should include work time. Yeah, that's what I can tell you. So some people are getting, most people don't get, you know, we've had a shift in our work culture where most people used to get physical activity through their work. They didn't have to think about it any other time because they were getting enough through work. Most of us don't get enough through work. So what are the common perceptions about exercise? We're finally getting to behavior. What are the common perceptions about exercise behavior? That people are lazy, that it's a personal failure, that they don't have any willpower, they don't have time, right? Time is the big barrier. We put quotes around time as barrier because those of us in this world consider it just a emphasis of priorities. But I just wanted you to take a minute and think about the language we use when we talk about exercise as a virtue. Like, you're so good, you're exercising, and therefore people don't, you're bad, you're not, you know, like, why is it a virtue? When it really should be something that's just part of our life and part of our day. And if we have all these ideas that people are lazy and failing and they don't have any willpower, is it a wonder that we're failing at meeting physical activity recommendations as a nation? We've turned it into a negative. So finally, I want to ask you, so this is a different model than putting it at the individual. So this is what we call the social ecological model. Has anybody heard of this? Emily's heard of it. Okay, we got some, good. Well, I know we have some biology people, and so this all comes from ecology. It started in biology ecology. So this could, you know, this may speak to you. So in this model, the idea is the individual is at the center, right? They're at the center. We're still focusing on an individual, but we recognize that we're influenced by many different things. We are influenced, so interpersonal, we're influenced by who we are and those things about us, about like our education, our sex, our race, those things about us that are personal. But we're also influenced by the people around us, right? It's really the people, our families, our friends, the people we go to school with also have an influence on our health behaviors. The organizations that we interact with, the communities that we live in, the policies that override some aspects of our lives, and the other word that I don't have in there, but it fits under community, is environment. So the idea is it's not just about individual choices and behaviors, but that all these other levels will have influence on us. Is one level more influential than the others? They can be. And so one of the things that's important is to think about, am I talking about trying to change a health behavior of a single person, or do I want to get as many people as possible? So when I talk about a social ecological model, I'm thinking about trying to affect a larger population. I'll see if this makes sense. Okay. I used to use smoking as my example, but you guys live in a different, so we're going to use COVID as our example, because COVID and our response back in March and April is a great example of the social ecological model influencing our behaviors around us. Okay, so I want you to think about back when we first went into, you know, lockdown, shutdown, stay home, stay safe. We, you know, when everything started happening in March, what did we have? What were the first things we had? Oh, Malik said policy. I'm going to do that with some examples here, and then let me know if I don't answer your question. Do you think this? That's a great question, Haley. We're going to get back to that one. Tell me if we don't. Does where you live have an effect? Absolutely. That's the environment. Okay. How did we? Okay. So think about what were the first things that we had to do with the COVID-19 pandemic? What were the first instructions given to us? This was pre-mask time. We weren't told to wear masks. We had to stay home, quarantine, self-quarantine. What else? No traveling, less socialization. And I want you to think about how did our world make that? Because our world stopped on a dime and did a 180-degree turn, right? We all changed our behaviors like that. How did that happen? Did we all just make a personal decision? Today I will not be with people. Today I will stay separate. Well, we did, but we also had other things. So we had campaigns, right? We had campaigns. We had a policy. So I'm going to go back to the policy of someone who said that at the beginning. We had a policy that said everybody needs to stay home. We're shutting down restaurants. We're shutting down bars. We're shutting down everything that's not essential. That policy changed all of our behaviors, right? That was an example. It wasn't fun. It was necessary, but it did have a big impact on our behaviors. We also had recommendations for social distancing. We had campaigns with signage. We had support signs. Yay for frontline workers. We support you. What else? And then we're home and we're like, oh my God, I'm on the computer all the time. I don't know what happened. You guys are on Instagram or Facebook. You know, suddenly we've got people like, here's the graph on how we flatten the curve, right? We're sharing information. We're sharing stupid things on Facebook to help, like, I got this, what was the video? The guy doing Tyrol dancing and yodeling on his balcony. You know, how do you do a marathon running on your balcony? Is that making sense what I'm saying? Like, we had a social support network through social media of how to get through this, right? My friends wrote articles like how to keep exercising. We had the fun song of there was like, I just felt like social media was flooded with ideas of how to maintain social distance and maintain some mental health. Many cities changed the environment. So here's an example from April. Oakland, California closes streets to traffic on Saturdays to make it easier for residents to maintain a safe distance. They changed the environment to help people keep that distance, right? It wasn't just a personal, but it wasn't just individuals. What else? We put stickers on the floor to show people where to stand, how to maintain that distance. We put circles in the museum so you can stay 6 feet apart. We put plexiglass up at the grocery store. Hans, I hope so. Social media can alter a person's view on their self-image, which would encourage them to exercise more. I think that's a great question, and I would love to have your input about that. Here's another policy. I don't want to get into masking too much because it's become politicized, but this was a policy where in this city, if you didn't wear the face mask, you would get fined $50, right? That's a policy in order to influence your behavior. Here's one more that comes from a whole nother theoretical realm of behavioral economics, but I love it. Instead of fining people, can you see what this is? Do you see the, I have to look here at the camera. They're getting a discount on their alcohol for wearing a mask in the liquor store. So you wear a mask in our store, you get a discount, right? So think about that. Does that influence behavior? It's not about, it's like, it's an external force. Last one in the COVID, it's the people around us. So this is that question, can social media influence us? I want you to be honest, and I want you to think back whether it was this week, last week, or 2 months ago, whether it was a social distancing or a masking, where you went into a situation and either briefly or for an extended time, you didn't necessarily do what you had intended. So if you went into it and you said, like, I'm wearing a mask, I'm always wearing a mask, and you get there and nobody's wearing a mask, did your mask come off? Or vice versa? Did you like, I'm okay, we're outside, it's no big deal. Everybody's wearing a mask and you ended up putting a mask on. If you're willing to answer, I just want you to think about that, because I think the power of the people, I am, with every passing year, I believe more and more of the power of the people behind us, the people around us to influence our behavior. Let's see if anybody wrote anything yet. Do I get how about a nod or a no? Have you ever gotten closer or further than you had planned, worn a mask or not worn a mask as the situation changed? I would put more masks on if no one had anywhere I was going. So you didn't let that social situation influence your behavior. You had the power to overcome that social influence. You mask when you're in public. You know what? Emily, power of the pack. Maybe masking is hard because it's become politicized. And so I've just seen, anyway, it's something to think about. You could think about eating, we can think about this for other behaviors. There you go, because of your living situation. Wasn't your intention, masks are real thing. Everybody in the hospital, who's that? Brittany, is wearing the mask. It's normalized, right? Everybody's doing it. You wouldn't even think of not doing it. So that's between a policy and the environment. So this is hard for you guys to read, but it's that social ecological level applied to physical activity. So it's all these same things. So I don't know if this looks familiar to anybody, but now we're looking at, COVID gave us the example around a health behavior. Now we're gonna look at this same thing, this social ecological approach with physical activity. Does anyone recognize this? Rail trail, exactly. This is your rail trail. This is in Johnson. So you put a rail trail in, makes it nice, and you can walk, you can bike. It's like right there. If you haven't been there, go see it. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did recently. So we create safe places to exercise. What's the opposite? What's the opposite? Well, the opposite is, when you have a narrow bike lane and there's cars whizzing by. I don't know about you, but I was surprised at how many cars are going up and down this road in Johnson, Vermont. I thought it'd be a sleepy town. I was wrong. There's cars whizzing by. I don't know how comfortable I'd feel riding a lot in that bike lane. How about a pole in the middle of the sidewalk for walking? Now you may walk around it, but if you have a wheelchair or a walker to maneuver around that, or a stroller with your kids in it, you're gonna think twice. You're gonna say like, I'm not gonna walk, I'm just gonna get in the car and drive. What are other things in the environment that support us being physically active? Having a bike rack, right? Where you can tie up your bike and you can get a nice sandwich. This picture at the bottom is a trail. It's a skating rink. No, it's a trail. It's a skating trail in Finland, which has put tons of money into infrastructure for physical activity. So you can skate your way somewhere rather than driving. Other examples of how policies and environments, these are some pictures. The top right is a proposed bicycle highway in the Netherlands. So it's an actual highway for bicycling. The bottom right is a bike lane in the middle of the highway that is protected and also has some sun protection, but then has solar panels. A policy that supports physical activity is having walking treadmill workstations at work, or having showers at work, or having gym facilities at work. Those are policies or letting people do, having a flexible work schedule is a policy in the work site that can influence people's physical activity. All right, so I want you to think about, is there anything in the environment or a policy that helps you be physically active? Good weather is not something we really control. You are correct, but it's not really control, except you could have better clothing for any weather. So, think about, is there anything in your environment or a policy in your world that might influence your activity? Your dogs are that's a personal thing. Having a gym with the policy of being 24 open. So insurance reimbursement through work, that's a big influence on physical activity. Shops along the rail trail. Yeah, having a destination where you can get food or stop and have a beverage or do something on the rail trail. The rail trail itself is actually the environment. So think about something, so hills and sand dunes gives Thomas a better workout because he has to climb up the hills. Parks have a big influence. Do you guys have a fitness facility at school that provides a free place for you to exercise? So there's a policy at the university that says we want our students to have access to free equipment, right? We don't all have that. I work at a university, so I have that. I worked at another university where they didn't give faculty or staff free access. It was only for the students. It's a long question. Do wealthy people? Yes. People who are wealthy and higher SES have higher rates of physical activity, often due to access. And that's why people, so that's a great question, because a rail trail provides access to everybody, especially if goes through all communities. Now, sometimes they put bike trails through the wealthy neighborhoods, and then it's a little bit not as helpful. But the idea of something like a rail trail is that it gives access to everybody to minimize those disparities. So that's a great question. Having places close enough. So how about Molly? So you have places close enough to walk. I'm going to ask you to think a little further. Are they safe places to walk? Are they aesthetically pleasing places to walk? Are they convenient for you to get to? So those are all part of that, making it more accessible. Sidewalks are a great example of environmental changes that allows people to be physically active. So it's less about like just personal motivation, but giving people that environment. Brittany, having a partner or friend. Again, I believe that social influence is so important. It's not just the environment, it's all these things combined. It's the environment, it's the policies, it's the people around us. Okay, I was supposed to talk about my research today. You guys are doing great. I'm gonna skip through that one. That was a big failure, but you know what? No, I'm not going to. My first job, when I was my first study as a research project manager, we were trying to study giving auto assembly workers a free exercise program. We gave them a free program, we offered them stuff. They were having a lot of injuries, and we're like, we're gonna help you prevent painful injuries. And that, as you saw, was a huge failure. Big failure. Why? Because we didn't take into account anything. We didn't take into account the company policies, the environment, which include the physical environment, the social environment, and management versus the workers. For having a complete failure, I learned a lot from it. I didn't realize it until years later when I studied more about and learned more about the social ecological approach, why we probably had such a big failure. Luckily, that wasn't all attributed to me as the failure. So So I did a study in my doctoral program about working women meeting physical activity recommendations. I wanted to say, what's the difference between, so working women tend to have a lot of obligations, so it's harder for them to exercise. And so I wanted to know, some do, some meet recommendations, right? And some don't. So what's the difference between those who meet recommendations and those who don't? We'll see if you just let me know if you have questions. So I was living in Alabama at the time. We recruited women who were working. They had to work at least 30 hours a week, living in one of these 2 small towns and working age. And we asked them things about themselves. We asked them about their confidence in exercising, what they expected to get out of exercise. Did they have social support for exercise? Did they have skills like goal setting and time management? We asked them about how they perceived the environment that they lived in for supporting exercise. And we asked them about any worksite policies that might support exercise. Then we measured their activity. We put 2 devices on them. They're very attractive. Wear it on your hips, really fun, great belt. They wore that, the accelerometer that measures physical activity. And then we gave them a GPS device to wear at the same time so we could see where the exercise was happening. And we combined the data. This is a map of the physical activity data with the GPS data so that we could, and we were able to, for every minute of the day, we could say where they were and what intensity they were working at. So blue represents a place being sedentary. If you're sedentary, you're often it's just a whole bunch of blue dots on top of each other, which you may not be able to see here. Yellow is moving at a light intensity, orange is moderate, and red is vigorous. So this person's moving, this is over the course of a day, mostly light activity. We're gonna zoom in on that orange section, and you can see they're moving at a moderate pace. That's what those orange, so it's clearly somebody's walking or biking, right? Because they're moving at this faster pace and they're outside because it's not all centered in one spot. If they were in a building, in a gym, all those orange dots would just be all on top of each other. But here we can, let's see if you have make sure you don't have a question. Okay, so we recruited over 100 women and we got it from a number of different employers, different sizes of people in terms of obesity. And what did we find out? We found out, so 41 of them were actually meeting those minimum recommendations. 62 of them were either completely inactive, did no exercise, or they did some but not enough to meet recommendations. So what's the difference between the groups? And does it have to do with their personal characteristics or other factors outside of just their individual characteristics? So, so we found that one of the biggest factors associated with meeting recommendations was doing exercise outside using the built environment. So walking and biking, running, something outside. They also had some skills. That's what self-regulation is, that they had time management skills. The other thing we found for the people who met, the women who met recommendations, was that they did their exercise. If they didn't get it all at one time, they got it throughout the day. So what does it mean? Why, why is that? What was let's see if I have any implications there. Do you have any questions? But our takeaway was that, people who used a gym or home exercise equipment, they did exercise, but they didn't always meet the recommendations because, they didn't get to the gym. They got there twice that week, but not 3 times. They did it for 10 minutes, not for 30. And the people who used the built environment were accumulating physical activity at that moderate to vigorous intensity over the course of the day. So really what the takeaway from this was, yes, there were personal aspects for these women who met recommendations, but there were also environmental factors. And so the idea was, going back to the question somebody had early in our discussion, is perhaps encouraging people to try to get it throughout the day. They may be more likely to meet physical activity. Okay, I'll do this one study and I want to leave time for questions. So this was another study looking at environment and mobility. So this is a group of people with a midlife, so people from age 50 and older who have mobility impairments. It means they use a cane, a walker, or a wheelchair to get around. And we wanted to know if there was how an outdoor environment might help them be more active. There's our pole, again, this is the population where the pole in the middle of the sidewalk has a real implication. When the curb cut isn't cut, you know what a curb cut is? The slope when you cross in the intersection, when that's not there, that has a real implication for these people. So this was out in Seattle, Washington. Again, with that GPS device, we had them wear it, and then we were able to see on the GPS if they were walking and how much they moved outside. I think only one person biked. And then we asked them their perceptions also, just questions. So of these people, 46%, so almost half of them did active walking trips outside. And a lot of those were from home. Sometimes they had a destination and sometimes it was a round trip walk. The mean trip length was about 22 minutes, which is pretty good. Not quite at that 30, but this is just for a trip. And some people use power wheelchairs and we didn't count those for the purposes of this study. What did we learn? Just checking for questions. We learned that the people who took those active trips, these are older people with mobility disabilities that use a device for getting around. Those people who took active trips lived in places of more people, street density. So it's a more urban setting. Street density means that the higher street density, the more different ways you can get to the same place, right? You have lots of cross streets and lots of different ways to get to the same place. The people who walked were more likely to do it in places that were not hilly and had a higher walk score, which is anybody heard of walk score? It's a way of characterizing your community for active living. And you can go online and do it. You could go do walk score for Johnson. You can do it for your hometown. Go ahead and check out your walk score. Then look at how walk score, you put in your zip code, I think. You can compare it to New York or Chicago or Boston, and you can see the differences. There's lots of things that go into walk score. And the people who walked also felt that they lived in places worth walking to. So there was a lot, like land use mixed diversity means you have options of, you can walk to the post office, you can walk to the library, you can walk to a cafe, that they perceived they lived in places with more people and had more options for walk. So what's the take home? This gives us some evidence that having a walkable environment means that somebody is more likely to be active, have that lifestyle physical activity than people who don't live in a walkable environment. That's the takeaway on that. What factor affects the amount a person gets the most? Does it differ per person? We don't have an answer for that. And so with the social ecological model, we believe every level enhances the other level. So you could have someone who wants to exercise, but they don't have a place, they don't feel safe, they don't know how, nobody around them does it. So the fact that they want to do it and they're personally motivated is kind of squashed down, right? It can be the opposite. We have plenty of people who live in very beautiful, walkable, bikeable places, but they don't have any motivation. Maybe they don't have people around them who do it. So it doesn't matter that the environment's there. Now we have the opposite. We have people who I don't know if I really want to do that, but they live in a really walkable place and I'll just walk over to the store. So they're getting something out of it, even though they weren't very motivated, they end up walking there. And I think that social component is important as well. So does that make sense, Colin? That it depends on the situation, which is why we want to enhance all the levels all those factors rather than merely focusing on one level. I want to leave time for questions, and so I won't talk about the study. So I'm going to skip through this one. Think about this. Here's a question. What can we learn from COVID messaging and actions to apply to physical activity promotion? Think about, I want you to go from here and think about, like, what has influenced me to behave the way I behave around COVID things? Would that apply to physical activity? So this is today. When I was walking into my office, I saw this sign in my building. It says, keep to the right in the direction you're moving and don't. Well, what if that was a sign that said, before you go to this door, through this door, do 10 jumping jacks? Right? What if we had this one says, keep to the right. It's got the arrows in the direction you're walking. Don't gather, keep to the right. Another one. What if it said, you know, run down, well, we don't, skip down the hall. Skip down the hall from this point until you get to the end. To, you know, if we change the environment to encourage physical activity. So I get excited about changes in the environment. This was the big news that came out the other day. So right now the rail trail is not finished, but we just got, there was an announcement, I think last week or the week before, there's going to be like 13, 14 million dollars put in to finish the rail trail. I think that's pretty exciting. It's gonna be like 90 miles or something. I just want to give a plug here at the University of Vermont. We are starting our second year of our Master of Science in Physical Activity and Wellness Science. And if you'd like to learn more about this, in this program, students learn about how to design programming around promoting physical activity and wellness. And I'd love to talk to you more about it. I'm going to take your questions, comments. I'm going to look, and then this is my information. I'll put that back. I'll leave that there. Okay. So I want to open up to questions, and if you don't have any, I'll go back and talk about the other study. But coming back. Sorry, here we go. Can we unmute people now? Is that allowed?
Well, I'm thinking, thanks, Nancy. That was great, and everybody had so many great questions. I'm thinking I want to make sure the people who asked questions earlier, if we didn't get to those, that they get a chance to ask them. So I think maybe if we do them in the chat, and if your question wasn't answered yet, if you can rewrite it, that would be great.
I'm going to read, well, I mean, I love it. People want to ask a question or we can chat. Let's see. Were the results of the study separated by how types amounts of movement impairment? We didn't assess the type or the amount of movement impairment. They were all able to walk. I mean, they're all able to, now we had the power wheelchair users, or the people who sometimes used a power wheelchair and sometimes didn't. So we did not include those in active trips, but the goal was we had any trip of 5 minutes or more was a trip. So we didn't break it down by movement impairment. People who live in cities are healthier than people who live in rural areas. That is a huge question, and people spend their whole lives studying that question. There are aspects of the urban environment that we believe are health enhancing, but there's other data that, there's aspects of rural life that can also be health enhancing. So it depends on the population and many factors. So I'm sure that's probably an annoying answer, but that's what we know, is that it's very complicated. Do you think if you did your study in a different place in Seattle, you would have gotten this? Absolutely. What was interesting about that study in Seattle was we had people in different types of places. So some people lived in urban and some people were in suburban. We didn't do it in a rural area. And so, so that would change the results, except we did find a difference between people who had an environment that was more supportive versus those who didn't. Actually, I think a rural community would have accentuated because they'd be even less likely to walk down a road with a walker. We're all in this together. Absolutely. We have to support everybody around us for doing what is better for all of us. Oh, Emily. What age would lack of exercise affect a person the most? Can't answer it. Can't do it. You know, because what, kids? Like kids, it's setting up a lifetime of their metabolism. Kids need to jump. They need to run. They need to do what they call odd exercise because it builds the bones, which is going to affect them in their much older years. What is it, like the age of 10 is when we reach our peak of physical activity and we go down from there? You know, doing it through all ages is beneficial. That's my answer. It's going to be so awesome, Hans, when we get this rail trail. And yes, that'll be the longest in New England. And what I love is it's also going to bring economic benefits. And I'm glad that our leadership recognizes, I know connecting to the Canada's bike trail system, you can tell I'm very excited. Jenna, this is the big question. Do you think it's more difficult now with COVID for older adults? Yes. I think we have a tsunami coming of real issues with older adults who are confined to small places, have their social interaction curtailed drastically, have their physical activity curtailed drastically. And as a fitness instructor, I'm you know, working with anybody that I could. I would design programs and figure, you know, like some people are doing it where they stand, the fitness instructor stands outside and the people stay in their rooms, but the fitness instructor is there to lead the class. We're trying to do as much pushing through online as we can, but we're not getting everybody. If you have ideas, we need so much emphasis on older adults at this time, I can't even tell you. Do you feel confident? I don't know anything about my results going into a research project. That's a private question. So the question is, do you feel confident about results going into the research project? That's the point of the research, is we're testing a question that we don't know the answer to. And I have learned to not be tied to one or the other. The goal is to come up with the answer, and it's to not go into it with preconceived notions. I don't know if there was a spike in laziness, and I don't like to call it laziness. Some people didn't have access to exercise opportunities once COVID hit. It's affecting our lots of things, and so I'm pretty sure we're less physically active, but people are also getting stir crazy and going outside because they're going stir crazy inside. So bike sales are through the roof. I tried to get my bike fixed, and first they told me I wouldn't get a part that I needed for 3 months to fix my bike because they're so backed up in fixing bikes and selling bikes. So who knows? Maybe biking is improving. What type of variety of exercise should we accomplish? I'm going to let someone else. How much cardio do you need to do for health benefits? How much weightlifting do you need to do for health benefits? We answered this. At least twice a week. Depends on what your goal is, right? Do you want to do the minimum? Do you have a certain physical fitness level? It's a whole level. It's what's your goal? How about that? How much exercise should you do? Depends on what your goal is. Thank you, Ruby. Rest days are important. You know, again, resting is important. There are people who overtrain. There's little kids who focus on one sport too early, and there's negative repercussions from that. I really work with the people who aren't moving. So my specialty area isn't strength and conditioning because it's such a tiny part of the population who does it. It doesn't mean it's not important and needed. It's just not in my area. Does the minimum amount of exercise change based on the type of activity? Well, no, it's not the type, it's the intensity. Specific recommendations for strength training. According to the physical activity guidelines, I think it's twice a week, but depends on what your goal is for strength training. Do you want to be in what is it, the muscle building competition? You're going to have to do a little bit more than the minimum recommendations. If you're just trying to get someone like me to just do something, anything for strength training, then 2 days a week is going to have some benefits. Exercise is particularly beneficial for people with exercise-induced asthma. And there is a lot of evidence that exercise can be beneficial for people with asthma. It may take a little bit more guidance from either a health professional or exercise specialist so that you don't induce bronchospasm with exercise. Many people with asthma exercise and it's beneficial. Oh my gosh, Isabella had a great grandfather who was using the treadmill running and doing push-ups into his 90s. That's awesome. Isn't that exciting? It's inspiring. Can overdoing physical activity early in life reduce your lifespan? I've never seen anything to recommend that. So that's the question, right? Like if you overstress your heart, do you take, no, it's a muscle. When you work a muscle, it responds and gets stronger. 30 minutes of moderate. Yes, Jenna, you answered the question. What would you say? Who wants to answer this question? Last question. What would you say is the most well-rounded outdoor exercise activity? Actually, I just did, anyway. No. What's my answer to that? What is my answer? Hiking, running, biking, hiking, swimming. Yay, Maria, the one you're gonna do. The best one is the one that you're gonna go do and that you're going to enjoy. You know, it doesn't have to be, the idea is that there is benefit and joy to get from this. It's not always easy, but it's the one that you're gonna enjoy. Why not enjoy it? Why torture yourself? Unless you have a goal that you need to meet and you know, you may want to push yourself harder. I'm not saying you shouldn't push yourself. A mixture is always good. You know, what is it? Variety is the spice of life. So the mixture is always good just to keep it interesting and fun. I appreciate that. I have to move. I have to do this. I'm gonna bring you guys down. No, I'm gonna go like, no, that's not gonna work. Okay. Thank you. I think, are we good? Any other?
So I don't see any more questions coming in. If anybody wants to shout something out real quick at the end, feel free. The final thank you. Stick around for a couple of minutes. We just have a couple of announcements, but I do want to thank Nancy. That was a great presentation by Dr. Gell. Amazing information. I think we all learned a lot, and your guys' questions were great. Thank you so much for your engagement. This is a new format for all of us. We're all still getting used to it, but I think everybody did great today. So thank you.
Thanks, you guys.